In this video, we're going to cover query settings. I have a knowledge stack set up here with an Encyclopedia Britannica from the year 1926. And with this, I have three rather large PDF files that I've uploaded. And what we're going to do now is go to the query settings and define the standard query settings that will be used for this knowledge stack. These query settings will be used by default when using this knowledge stack in a conversation. Of course, when you're actually applying a knowledge stack to a conversation, you can alter the query settings if needed for that particular discussion. But if we want to just set defaults, we could do it from here. The first option that you'll have is up at the top with the prompt prefix. So if you want to add any other details for your prompt that the model will receive, so any additional instruction, feel free to add it in this section. In the next area, we have number of chunks. So by default, you could select either low, medium, high, or highest, or even choose a custom value. And this represents the max number of chunks that will be sent to the model. If you're working with a local model, you'll probably want to have a lower number of chunks because local models, you might overwhelm them with too much context, whereas online models, they can handle more context, more chunks. But just keep in mind that if you do that, then there's going to be a hit to your token usage. So if you're paying for that model, then you also might want to reduce the number of chunks. For this one, we'll use an online model, but let's go ahead and just select medium. And then for the similarity threshold, this is essentially the cutoff. So if you want things to be, let's say, medium or more, or higher or more, select that setting from the drop-down here. And with search type, you have the options of semantic search, keyword search, or hybrid search. So semantic search will get more of the semantic meaning of what's being queried, which is really good for RAG because let's say if you're searching for a cat, and maybe you want kitten or feline to also appear, then it's better to go with semantic search. But if you're looking for an exact match, an exact keyword search, you can select that option, or just let the model choose with hybrid search, and we'll select that option. And the next option here is the max full content context. So with this is pretty handy. If you have a question that you're asking your model, such as provide a summary where the context of a full document is really needed, then you might select low, medium, or high, and that's going to send full files over to the model. So potentially it could send one full PDF or maybe all the PDFs if I select medium, but that's going to be a lot of context I'm sending to the model since these are very large PDFs. So I'm going to leave this disabled for this particular example. The next option is you can enable or disable synthesize query. I'm going to leave this one enabled. Overall, as you continue a conversation with a model with a knowledge stack enabled, this is going to be a really good option because it's going to best handle all that prior context with new questions being asked. But if you're looking more so to kind of one-shot it, so get one answer for each question without really caring too much about the prior context, then you could leave this disabled. And the last option we have is enable PII scrubbing, which I'm going to showcase more in another video. All right, so I want to save these changes and then X out of this and then open up a new conversation. Let's add the encyclopedia to this conversation. This encyclopedia was published in 1926, so I'm not going to get any really current information out of this. So I'm just going to try to think of stuff that happened before 1926 and see what kind of results that we get. And then again, if you need to modify those query settings, click on configure, and then you can modify the query settings from the default. If you have multiple knowledge stacks selected and each of those have different query settings, it's going to pull one of the query settings for the knowledge stacks and apply it to this conversation. So if you have multiple ones selected, always take a look at the query settings and make sure it's appropriate for how you're going to use it in the conversation that you're having right now. All right, so let's minimize this and ask a question. So thinking of 1926, I could ask about Winston Churchill, who wasn't yet Prime Minister of Britain at that time, but he was well known in politics prior to 1926. So asking about him should provide some results. So let's go ahead and ask, tell me about Winston Churchill. And what's going on right now is that knowledge stack is being queried and the most relevant information is being compiled and then sent over to the model, and the model is going to use that for context. So if we look in this answer here, we should see nothing that takes place after 1926. So we see some information around 1911, and I don't see anything about him being prime minister. So it looks like the model, Gemini 2.5 Flash, did a pretty good job at just keeping the response very specific to the context it received and not using its knowledge that it has about Winston Churchill outside of this context. And to look at the context that was sent over, if we expand this and scroll down a bit, we'll see that, again, we use a hybrid search with a similarity threshold low. So we see the information about the query settings. We see that synthesized query here, Winston Churchill's Biography of Life Achievements. And we see some information about the query analysis, such as the keywords that were actually used. And then if we scroll down, we see the resulting chunks. And it looks like there was a total of 8 chunks. And if you want to view the content of the chunk, click on View Full Content, and that will allow you to browse through the information that was sent. And let's ask another question. Let's see. Tell me about Van Gogh. I know there's a little bit of information about Van Gogh in this encyclopedia, but not a lot. So let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so again, we see some information. It doesn't look like there's anything after 1926. So it's still respecting just the context of what it's provided. If you ever see it's not locking down on the context that's provided, what I would recommend is to modify the prompt a little more and be very specific that you only want it to use the context that is provided, and that's critical not to use any of its knowledge that it was trained on. All right, so these results are also looking pretty good. And let's ask one more question. Did Winston Churchill know Van Gogh? And this is exactly what you want to see from the response. So again, it's just going off the context of the knowledge stack. And it's making, kind of an educated guess. It can see when Vincent van Gogh was born and when he died. It sees when Winston Churchill's political career started in 1895. So there's no indication that they actually knew each other, but there was some overlap in their lives and their careers. And I find this to be an acceptable answer given the context of everything. Again, this example is using this particular configuration. If I wanted to send more chunks, I can select higher amount. If I wanted to do a keyword search, you could select that. And then maybe you don't want to synthesize a query, I'll disable that. And let's ask one more question. Who is Julius Caesar? And we'll see if Julius Caesar shows up in the knowledge stack. Well, apparently not. So if we want to verify this, let's copy this, and then we'll go back to the knowledge stack, and then click on Chunks Console, and paste in Julius Caesar, and see if he shows up. And he does show up if it's a hybrid search. Let's click on keyword search, because that's what we used before, and run that query. And he does show up, but since I'm using a keyword query, I didn't add the pretext before that. So let's say, who is Julius Caesar? That way it's a one-to-one match from what we used in the conversation, and run the query. And we see with keyword search, no results. So this is a good example for when you're doing a keyword search, the text that you put in is going to matter, even with any kind of the pretext in there. So try to be specific with what you really want with keyword search. And now we see that context here. Let's give this one more try with our conversation. I'm going to click back, and then instead of who is Julius Caesar, let's add a context shield just to make sure that none of this context is slipping through. And then type in Julius Caesar, and let's just verify that we have keyword search on. Okay, we do. And let's click on enter and see what we get now. Well, we do get some information about a play about Julius Caesar. And if we expand this, yep, we see some information. And we do see the context that was sent was indeed a Shakespeare play with Julius Caesar. Okay, I hope this helped with better understanding of the query settings. Again, I recommend that you configure these settings in the way that best utilizes the knowledge stack and providing content to the model while being as precise as you can, because you don't want to overload models with context. And if you're paying for that model, you also don't want to overpay for that model.